There is a painting so famous it has become invisible. You have seen it 1,000 times. A long table, 13 men seated in a row, bread, wine, a tablecloth of white linen, and at the center, a serene blue-robed figure with open hands and sorrowful eyes. Leonardo da Vinci's masterpiece, painted in 1495, reproduced on calendars, church walls, coffee mugs, and hotel rooms across the world. And almost every detail is wrong. Not artistically wrong, historically wrong, archaeologically wrong. Wrong in ways that have quietly distorted the way 2 billion Christians understand the most sacred meal in human history. Here is the question that shatters the familiar image. If the Last Supper was a Jewish Passover Seder, and the Gospel of Luke tells us explicitly that it was, then why does almost everything we think we know about that evening contradict what we know about how first-century Jews actually celebrated Passover? What food was truly on the table? Why would the apostles have been reclining, not sitting? Who sat where? And why does the seating arrangement reveal something devastating about the betrayal to come? And what were the exact words Jesus spoke over the cup? Words that only make sense when you understand the precise ritual structure of a first-century Seder. By the end of this investigation, the familiar painting will be replaced by something far older, far stranger, and far more powerful. The truth of what happened in that upper room on the 14th of Nisan will emerge, not from tradition, not from Renaissance art, but from the ancient texts themselves. Welcome to Bible Secrets, Hidden History. Before we enter that upper room and reconstruct what truly unfolded there, consider joining our community of seekers by subscribing to this channel. If you believe this history deserves to be preserved, a simple like helps this truth reach those who are ready to receive it. Now, let us begin. Chapter 1. The 14th of Nisan. The year is approximately 30 CE, possibly 33 CE. Scholars still debate the precise year, but the season is not in question. It is spring in Jerusalem. The city is swollen with pilgrims. Flavius Josephus, writing in the Jewish War, describes Passover Jerusalem as a city transformed. Hundreds of thousands of worshippers flooding through the gates. The temple courts thick with the smell of roasting lamb and burning cedar wood. The Levitical choirs singing the Hallel psalms until their voices carried across the Kidron Valley. This is the context. This is the atmosphere. Not quiet, not intimate. Loud, ancient, and charged with centuries of memory. Now the first knowledge bombshell. The Gospels do not entirely agree on which night the Last Supper took place, and this disagreement is not a trivial footnote. It is a theological earthquake hiding in plain sight. The Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, place the Last Supper on the evening of the Passover Seder itself. Luke 22:15 records Jesus saying, "I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer." The word Luke uses for Passover is the Greek Pascha, which translates the Hebrew Pesach, the festival of deliverance, the night of the Exodus. But the Gospel of John tells a different story. In John 18:28, the chief priests refused to enter Pilate's praetorium on the morning of the crucifixion, because they do not wish to become ritually impure, because they have not yet eaten the Passover. In John's timeline, Jesus is crucified at the very hour the Passover lambs are being slaughtered in the temple courts. 2 timelines, 1 meal, 1 mystery. Some scholars, including the theologian N.T. Wright, have proposed that Jesus may have followed a different Passover calendar, perhaps the ancient solar calendar used by the Dead Sea Scroll community at Qumran. The Essenes, we now know from the scrolls discovered in 1947, celebrated Passover on a different night than the temple authorities. If Jesus used the Essene calendar, he could have held a genuine Passover Seder on Tuesday evening, while the official temple Passover fell on Friday. Both timelines preserved. Neither contradicted. The mystery deepens rather than dissolves. But for our purposes tonight, we will enter the upper room on the night the synoptics describe, the night Jesus himself called Passover, the night of the Seder. Chapter 2. The Seder of the First Century. The word Seder means, simply, order. From the Hebrew Seder, a sequence, a structure, a prescribed progression. To understand what happened at the Last Supper, the seeker must first understand what a first-century Passover Seder actually looked like, because it was nothing like the medieval European Seder most people imagine. With its printed Haggadah booklets, its gefilte fish, its familiar songs. The formal Haggadah as we know it did not exist in the first century. The text was not standardized until the rabbinic period, after the destruction of the temple in 70 CE. What Jesus and his disciples observed was an earlier, less codified form of the ritual, but its core elements are recoverable from the Mishnah, specifically from the tractate Pesachim, which codified Passover practice based on pre-destruction traditions. Here is what that ancient Seder contained. The meal began after nightfall on the 14th of Nisan. It was a commanded night, Leil Shemurim in Hebrew, a night of watching, echoing Exodus 12:42. It opened with the first of 4 cups of wine, the cup of sanctification, Kiddush. The wine was red. It was mixed with water in accordance with Greco-Roman symposium custom that had been absorbed into Jewish practice by the first century. Then bitter herbs, maror, horseradish or wild lettuce, dipped in carousel, a paste of crushed fruit and nuts meant to resemble the mortar used by Hebrew slaves in Egypt. Then unleavened bread, matzah. Not the thin, cracker-like squares of modern tradition, but thicker, rougher flatbreads baked without leaven in strict observance of Exodus 12:39. The rabbis taught that chametz, leavened bread, represented pride and corruption. Its removal from the household was a ritual purification of the inner life. Then the Passover lamb itself, the Korban Pesach, roasted whole on a spit of pomegranate wood, consumed entirely before morning. Not a single bone broken. This detail, recorded in Exodus 12:46, would find its devastating echo in John 19:36, where the soldiers, approaching the already dead Jesus on the cross, break none of his bones. The lamb was the heart of the meal, and this is where the first-century Seder diverges most sharply from anything practiced today. Because after the temple's destruction, the sacrifice of the Passover lamb became impossible. No temple, no altar, no lamb. Modern Seders place only a symbolic shank bone on the plate. But in the upper room in Jerusalem on the night Jesus gathered his disciples, the lamb would have been real. Slaughtered in the temple courts that afternoon, its blood collected by the priests, its carcass carried through the city streets to be roasted. The disciples tasted flesh that had been consecrated in the courts of the Lord. Chapter 3. The room itself now. Where were they sitting? They were not sitting at all. This is one of the most overlooked facts of the entire narrative, and it transforms the scene utterly. The Mishnah tractate Pesachim 10:1 states explicitly, "Even the poorest man in Israel must not eat on Passover night unless he reclines." The Hebrew word is hesabah, to recline on one's left side, in the posture of the Greco-Roman triclinium. leaning on cushions or a low couch, the right hand free to eat and drink. This was not merely comfort. It was theology enacted in posture. The reclining position was the posture of the free, of Roman nobility dining at leisure, of men who answered to no master. The rabbis decreed that every Jewish man, however impoverished, must eat the Seder in this posture, because on this night, all Israel is nobility. All Israel is free. The Exodus is not merely remembered, it is relived, which means Leonardo's long table with its upright, seated figures is an anachronism born of medieval European dining customs, not first-century Jerusalem. The upper room, the kataluma in Greek, sometimes translated guest room or upper chamber, would have been arranged as a triclinium. 3 low tables arranged in a U-shape or a single horseshoe configuration, with cushions or mats on the floor. The diners reclined on their left sides, their heads toward the table, their feet extending outward. This single physical fact reshapes everything, because reclining in this formation meant that the person to your right had their head positioned near your chest, which is why John 13:23 describes the beloved disciple as reclining en to colpo, literally in the bosom or at the breast of Jesus. He was not dramatically leaning across the table. He was simply positioned in the natural geometry of the triclinium, his head at the level of Jesus' chest, in the next place to the right. This also explains how Peter, seated elsewhere around the formation, was able to signal John across the room to ask Jesus who the betrayer was. The reclining arrangement placed different apostles at varying distances, some near the host, some at the far wings of the U. And it explains one more thing, something that has haunted scholars for centuries. Chapter 4. The seat of Judas. Where was Judas Iscariot sitting? John 13:26 records the moment Jesus identifies the betrayer. He takes a piece of bread, dips it, and hands it to Judas. The Greek word used for this dipped morsel is somion, a small piece of bread used as a scoop, dipped into a common dish. In first-century triclinium seating, the host, the most honored person present, occupied the central position. To his immediate left sat the second most honored guest. To his right, at the near position, sat someone trusted enough for private conversation, which is where John, the beloved disciple, was placed. But here is the knowledge bombshell concealed in that handed morsel. For Jesus to personally hand Judas the dipped bread, to physically place it in his hands rather than passing it down the table, Judas must have been seated immediately to Jesus' left, the position of the honored guest. Reclining to the host's left meant Judas's head was at the level of Jesus' left shoulder, close enough for whispered conversation, close enough for Jesus to lean slightly and speak quietly, as John 13:27-28 confirms, "What you are about to do, do quickly." But no one at the meal understood why Jesus said this to him. No one heard. No one understood. Because the words were spoken in the intimate proximity of the triclinium arrangement, between 2 men reclining side by side. Jesus placed the seat of honor at his left hand, the position of a beloved friend, and gave it to the one he knew would betray him. The question this raises is ancient and devastating. Was this an act of final grace? A last invitation to turn back? Or was it the fulfillment of Psalm 41:9? "Even my close friend, someone I trusted, one who shared my bread, has turned against me." Enacted deliberately, consciously, with full knowledge of what Judas would do? The text does not resolve this. It leaves the seeker to wrestle with it alone. Chapter 5. The 4 cups. The structure of the first-century SEDER was organized around 4 cups of wine. This fourfold structure derived from the 4 divine promises recorded in Exodus 6:6-7. 4 expressions of God's deliverance. I will bring you out. I will rescue you. I will redeem you. I will take you as my people. Each cup corresponded to one of these promises. The first cup, Kiddush, sanctified the night. The second cup followed the recitation of the Haggadah narrative, the telling of the Exodus story. The third cup, the cup of redemption, Kos Hagula, was drunk after the meal itself. The fourth cup, the cup of praise, concluded the Hallel, the singing of Psalms 115 through 118. Now listen carefully, because Luke 22:20 becomes something entirely different when heard inside this structure. Luke records Jesus taking the cup after supper, meta to dipnosaion, after eating, and saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you." After supper. That is the third cup, the cup of redemption. Jesus did not take a random cup of wine and assign it new meaning. He took the specific cup that the entire Seder had been moving toward, the cup that for centuries had commemorated God's promise to redeem Israel from bondage. And he declared that the redemption it symbolized was now being fulfilled. In him, through his blood. This is not metaphor inserted into a meal. This is the culmination of 15 centuries of liturgical memory, arriving at its intended destination in a single night. The Apostle Paul, writing to the Corinthians roughly 20 years after the event, in what is the earliest written account of the Last Supper, predating all 4 Gospels, records Jesus' words over the bread and the cup in 1 Corinthians 11:23-25. Paul's testimony is urgent and precise. He uses the Greek word paradidomai, I received and passed on, the same technical term used in rabbinic tradition for the transmission of sacred oral teaching from master to student. Paul is not reporting a rumor. He is transmitting a received tradition. And in that transmission, the cup of redemption becomes the cup of the new covenant. The Passover lamb becomes the Lamb of God. The unleavened bread, baked without corruption, without leaven, becomes the body broken without sin. The architecture of the ancient Seder was not abandoned on that night. It was fulfilled, stone by stone, cup by cup. Chapter 6. The broken bread. There is one more element of the first-century Seder that the Church has almost entirely forgotten, and it may be the most astonishing of all. During the Seder, the middle of 3 pieces of matzah is broken in half. One half is wrapped in a cloth and hidden, set aside until the end of the meal. In later Jewish tradition, this hidden piece is called the afikoman, from the Greek epikomion, a word whose meaning scholars have debated for centuries. Some derive it from afikomenos, meaning he who has come, or the coming one. Others dispute this etymology. But the practice itself, the breaking, the wrapping, the hiding, the bringing forth at the end of the meal, is ancient. Remarkably ancient. The afikoman must be found before the Seder can be completed. In modern tradition, children search for it. The head of the household ransoms it back from them. The meal cannot end until the hidden thing is returned. The parallels that early Christian theologians drew from this ritual were not subtle. A piece of bread, broken, wrapped in linen, hidden away, brought back at the meal's conclusion, necessary for the completion of the redemption narrative. This is not to claim that the afikoman is a prophecy of the resurrection. The evidence for its precise pre-70 CE form is too sparse for certainty. The seeker must hold this with appropriate caution. But it is to say this: The meal Jesus presided over on the night of his arrest was not a meal invented for the occasion. It was a meal saturated with layers of meaning accumulated over 15 centuries. A meal whose every gesture, every food, every cup, every broken piece of bread carried a weight of theological memory that his disciples would have felt in their bones. When Jesus broke the bread and said, "This is my body," he was doing something that every man at the table had watched the head of household do at every Passover of their lives. He was doing the familiar thing, and then he was saying something that made the familiar thing crack open and become something else entirely. Conclusion: the open loop closed. We began with a painting, a long table, 13 upright figures, white linen, clean bread, a serene and distant Christ. Now set it aside. In its place, a low room above the streets of Passover Jerusalem, the city roaring with pilgrimage and sacrifice outside the shuttered windows. 13 men reclining on cushions around a horseshoe of low tables, their feet behind them, their bodies leaning left. The smell of roasted lamb, the copper tang of wine mixed with water, bitter herbs, unleavened bread, rough and dense. At the center, the host, reciting words he had heard his father speak in Nazareth and his father's father before him, reaching back to Egypt itself. Words about blood on doorposts, words about a night of watching, words about a people redeemed from bondage. And then, the third cup lifted, the cup of redemption, and new words spoken over an ancient cup. Words that redirected the entire current of 15 centuries of liturgical memory toward a single person, a single event, a single night. To his right, the beloved disciple, close enough to feel the warmth of the host's breathing. To his left, the honored guest, the trusted friend, already clutching 30 pieces of silver. Already decided. This is not a serene tableau. This is a room on the edge of eternity. Every gesture is loaded. Every silence is filled. The question we opened with, what food was truly on the table, who sat where, and what the precise words over the cup actually meant. These are not questions of academic curiosity. They are the difference between a Last Supper that is a vague, candlelit atmosphere and a Last Supper that is the calculated, deliberate culmination of an entire covenant between God and humanity. Jesus was not improvising that night. He was completing something. Something begun in Egypt. Something embedded in bitter herbs and unleavened bread and a lamb without blemish. Something that the SEDER had been rehearsing year after year for 1,500 years. He took the most familiar thing his disciples knew, the Passover meal of their people, their liberation, their identity, and he stood at its center and said, "This is what this was always about. This, here, now. Me." The painting will never show you that. No canvas is wide enough. No frame can hold the weight of 15 centuries converging on a single broken piece of bread. But the ancient texts can. And now, you have heard them. If this investigation has opened something in you, a hunger to go deeper into the hidden history that the ancient texts preserve, then explore what this channel has uncovered in the next investigation. The archives are vast. The mysteries are older than the paintings that replaced them. Subscribe, stay, and keep seeking.